All right, let's continue talking about polynomials. Today we're going to learn how to factor. And we'll factor polynomials that have the form x squared plus bx plus c. So we'll talk more about that, and we'll find out that factoring is basically the inverse of multiplication. But first, let's take a look at kind of a puzzle. It's known as the diamond problems. So take a look at these problems, numbers within the diamond. See if you can figure out what the connection is between each of these four numbers. And then we're going to apply that to some problems here in a moment. So pause the video and think of the connection between these four numbers within each diamond. So did you see the connection? 3 and 5, 15. 3, 5, and 8. Maybe you saw that 3 plus 5 is 8. 3 times 5 is 15. 2 and 4, well, they have a product of 8 and a sum of 6. 1 and 10 have a product of 10, a sum of 11. Negative 5 and 7 have a product of negative 35 and a sum of 2. So I'd like you to take a look at, on your notes, these diamonds and see how many of these you can figure out. I guess my head's in the way. But see how many we can figure out as we go through here. So take some time to work through a couple of columns. Work through enough so that you get the hang of it. Restart it when you're ready. All right, so those are the values that we fill in for these diamond problems, these diamond puzzles. So take a look, see if you can match up with what you had. And as we take a look at this, know that the two numbers on the side, we always have in this diamond, we have the two numbers, we'll call them A and B. And those two numbers, it's the product of the two in the top and the sum of the two in the bottom. So if we think of it that way, we can always come up with those numbers in the puzzle. And as we see the connections, if we have two positives, like let's say we have a positive on top and bottom, know that the ones on the side have to be positive as well. Positive, 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 everything's positive. But let's say we have a negative as the product. Know that we have to have at least a negative, one negative and one positive as our two numbers on the sides. And then depending on which one has the larger absolute value, that will determine the sum. So if we have a negative as our product, we might have a positive or negative for the sum. So those are the things that we keep in mind as we work through these. If the product is positive, we know everything's got to be positive. If the product is negative, we know we'll have a combination of positive and negative, and our sum could be either one. So what is the connection of all this? Well, we'll figure out in just a moment. But what we're doing today is factoring. And factoring is expressing the polynomial as a product of two or more monomials or polynomials. So basically we're going the reverse step of multiplying. So when we multiplied 3x times x plus 2, whether we made our area model and said x plus 2, oops, I did that wrong, x plus 2, and multiplied it by 3x, we got 3x squared and 6x. So we got this value of 3x squared plus 6x. When we're factoring, we're doing the reverse step. So we're taking that 3x squared plus 6x, and we are taking out anything in common. So what is in common between these two sections? Well, they both share an x, so I can pull an x out of there. And I can divide them both by 3 and 6. So they're both divisible by 3 and they're divisible by x. So when I divide 3x squared by 3x, I'm left with x. When I divide 6x by 3x, I'm left with positive 2. So when we're factoring it, we're breaking it into these two parts, 3x times x plus 2. So basically doing the reverse of the distributive property, we're finding out what's our greatest common factor. That's why it's known as factoring. We're pulling out greatest common factors. I guess I can't spell either. Multiply. Okay, so think of factoring as the reverse of multiplication. So when we have two monomials, we know how to multiply that. We can distribute the x squared plus 2x plus 3x plus 6. Then we combine those like terms, and we end up with x squared plus 5x plus 6. So when we're factoring, we want to get it into that product of two monomials. So I need to break it back into x plus 3 and x plus 2. So x plus 3 times x plus 2. So the reason we're doing this, we'll learn later on, we'll use this later on because when we factor something, it helps us to solve quadratic equations. So we're going to work through that in our next unit, but we got to learn how to factor first. Now here's where those diamond problems that I showed you before are helpful. So when we're thinking of how to multiply x squared plus 3x plus 2, what are my two binomials that give me that product? Well, remember when we multiply, our two binomials, the first terms multiply together, and the last two terms multiply together. And then when we multiply these middle terms together, the 3 times the x, the 2 times the x, we end up adding those together. So that's where that diamond puzzle comes in. We're going to end up adding to get these two, and this is our product. So our product on top and the sum on the bottom. We got to come up with the two numbers. So in our first case, we need to get a product of 2 and a sum of 3. How do I do that? Well, think of my factors of 2. Factors of 2 are 1 and 2, and those add up to 3. So here's where I use those two numbers. Well, the only way to get x squared is x times x. So that's the first part of each binomial. And I have a positive 1 and a positive 2. So if I'm unsure about that, I can check my work. X times x is x squared. X times 2 is 2x. 1 times x is 1x. 1 times 2 is 2. And that combines to give me what I had to begin with. So you can always check your work to see if you did it right. Okay, so let's try another one. I'll set up the diamond for you. So x squared minus 11x plus 18. Well, I know the only way I can multiply to get x squared is x times x. There are multiple ways I can multiply to get 18. So if I set up my diamond here, 18 is my product, negative 11 is the sum. So now I got to figure out which values or which products of 18 give me a sum of negative 11. So since the product is positive, I know that they either have to be both positive products or both negative factors. So since they have a sum of a negative, I know they're both going to be negative. So I think of my factors, 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. The only ones that combine to give negative 11 are negative 9 and negative 2. So it's going to be x minus 9 and x minus 2 when I factor it down. Break it into those two factors that if I were to multiply these back together, I would get x squared minus 11x plus 18. Keep in mind, order doesn't matter. I could write this x minus 2 times x minus 9. Remember, multiplication is commutative. Order doesn't matter. So why don't you pause the video and solve numbers 3 through 6 on your own. Restart it when you're ready. All right, so you can check your work on those. Keep in mind when our product is negative, we have to have one positive and one negative. The one with the larger absolute value will be the one determined by the sum, or the sign of the sum. Since this is a positive, 7 has to have the larger absolute value. So 7 is positive, 4 is negative. Product and sum are both positive. Means these two numbers will both be positive. So x plus 2 times x plus 5. Here we have a positive sum. or a positive product and a negative sum. So the only way that I get a positive product is if they're both positive or both negative. Since the sum is negative, these are both negative. Negative product, so one of each. All right, so you got a few more problems to practice. Pause the video, try some more of these, and then restart it when you're ready. Okay, so make sure to check those over. Make sure that you're doing that correctly. The biggest thing to keep in mind with these is just make sure that you got to think of your factors. So it's easier when there's smaller numbers, but check your factors, check your sum. So like let's say we have this number 4 here. The product is negative 36. So you got to think through your list of factors. We got 1 and 36, 2 and 18. We've got 3 and 12, 4 and 9, and 6 and 6. And then as we're thinking through those list of factors, this is a negative. So one's got to be positive and one's got to be negative. So since that's the case, I'm going to find the difference of these. And as I look for the difference, it's got to be 9. 36 and 1 is a difference of 35. 18 and 2 is a difference of 16. 3 and 12 is a difference of 9. So I know it's going to be those two numbers. 4 and 9 is a difference of 5. 6 and 6 is a difference of 0. So once I narrow down that it's 3 and 12, I know that 9 is positive sum. So I know that 12 has to be positive. The 3 has to be negative, because 12 plus negative 3 is positive 9. If those signs were flipped around, it would give me a sum of negative 9. Okay, so it's just coming up with lists of those factors. So thinking about those and knowing those well will help you benefit, or will benefit you in learning how to do this real well. So knowing your math facts, helps out a lot here. So you'll get some practice in the assignment, and we'll see you in class.